taking this live on YouTube.
Right.
We're
Good.
live. We're live on
Hi.
Facebook. That's always exciting. All right. Okay, Sam, I think we are live, sir.
Oh,
Good.
hey, I see it recording.
I know. There we go. I see us in two screens here, which is always a little disconcerting, but
Right.
I'll try to put the Zoom meeting here over our faces. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Poison Pen podcast. My name is Patrick. I am your science fiction and fantasy selector here at the store. And I am really excited because after a 2-year hiatus, we get to talk with Sam Sykes for his third book, Three Axes to Fall, the
Mhm.
last in this latest trilogy that he's been writing. I'm sorry to see Sal's last book for a while, Sam. I've got to tell you, I've grown super attached to your characters, and but congratulations on book 3.
Thank you. And me too. I got very attached to these characters. And it's kind of painful because I've been getting steadily more attached to them. And I'm one of these artsy fartsy types that believes that uh writing can be a very mystical, touchy feely process.
Mm-hmm.
So like I don't know a lot about the characters I'm writing when I start writing them.
Yeah.
I sort of just start, usually with a concept or a name, and then they end up surprising me. And so by the end of this book, I was like very surprised by what every character ended up needing or wanting.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end, I was like, oh, like I kind of wish I had more books to ask more questions of these people.
Exactly.
But we were talking about Elden Ring right before we got
Right.
right before we got on, and I'm also kind of enamored of the idea of like not explaining a lot of what they're still going through. Like that kind of sounds fun to me.
Well, to be honest, it's sort of a mixed bag, right? Because we have writers like David Eddings, God rest
Mm,
his soul, that, continued on after the first Belgariad, where I felt like the characters' stories were pretty much told, and he
yeah.
sort of retold the first 5 books in that second series,
Yeah.
Lorien. So, can you keep story ideas fresh and not become enamored with kind of plot points or rehashing things characters have already done?
I think the ticket there is to be more in love with the characters than you are in love with the setting.
Yeah.
Like I'll just reiterate, like I'm a believer that like the audience will tell you what they want. So
Yeah.
if David Eddings just retold the Belgariad and people still bought it, it's like, well, people still like the
Hey,
Belgariad.
I bought it and I've reread both series. I don't
Oh
know how
yeah.
many times because I love those characters.
Like they're people like I never shame anyone for what they like. I like to know why they like things. And like some settings, and I think to be just a little hubristic because it is my interview,
Exactly.
like some settings, and my setting is one of them, have that potential to be revisited and seen through different lenses. But I think people are more forgiving of of revisiting the same series when they get to see it from someone else's point of view. So
Exactly.
like we've done a lot with Sal's point of view throughout this, and like I loved it, but I think like then if I did more, I would want to explore a different character's perspective,
Hmm.
or maybe just Sal's perspective on it from some other point in her life. Like I've had a few people ask if I'm ever going to do like a prequel series for Sal's time as Red Cloud, because we got a little more hint of what life was like for mages in this book before everyone went vagrant.
exactly.
And I think that could be a lot of fun. But
I,
at the
I
same
think it would
time,
be too. Would it be hard to, because Sal does really grow as a character throughout the entire series. I mean, she's a living, breathing person by the time, book one is done. You've really fleshed her out as a character, and she just gets more and more complex as books two and three come through. So for you, do you think it would be hard to go back to that point of view of, Sal not knowing what she knows now by the end of book three?
hmm, it depends, because like I think a big part of this story is that you never know or unknow things or don't know things. You just sort of see them from different perspectives. Like this last book is features some pretty heavy perspective changes from characters with pretty solid perspectives. So I kind of like the idea that a prequel for Sal would be more just for what she sees, uh how she sees a war that she's essentially the star of, like, and it might be very different because the same thing kind of happens in this one where she inadvertently becomes the center of a huge conflict. But
Exactly.
the idea of her enjoying that at a different point in her life, like I kind of think back to like the very early 2000s, and like, because I know 2020 is still too fresh to talk about for a lot of people, but like journey back in time with me to another thing that used to be too fresh in time to talk,
Exactly.
which was 9/11. And
Right.
in the aftermath of 9/11, we had like ultra patriotic movements. Like everyone was like supporting the troops, clapping, applauding, is like finally we're doing something. And like there were plenty of people saying like actually we should think more about what we're doing, but no one listened to them
True. You
for
know,
for many reasons. And we have enough distance now that we can kind of look at that. So but like it might be interesting to write about a society or a setting that like is a little more in love with aggression and war like that, because like
true.
we've kind of lived that, and it's a little strange to look at in the rearview mirror.
It really is. Yeah, and your society really does love war. I mean, in terms of,
Yeah.
war is the central conflict, especially by the end of book two. You've really pretty much confirmed that war has started, and it was an inevitability
Yeah.
due to a variety of manipulations by a variety of villains who are fantastic, by the way. You really
Oh,
do
thank
a great
you.
job creating some really wonderful villains in your
Yeah, thank
books.
you.
But I also like your books because you are not afraid to make your characters gray. They may be doing the right thing, but they're not necessarily good. And
Yeah,
Sal is not a good person.
Sal like is pretty open about the fact that she's not a good person and she's aware of it, and she
Mhm.
constantly says she wants to be better but acknowledges it that it's way harder than it seems, because
Right.
like it is fucking hard to be a good person. Apologies for the profanity, I know we're
Oh, we
all
can swear in
liars,
this one. Yeah.
but like it's hard to be what you need,
Mhm.
what other people need, what the world needs, and what the situation needs all at the same time.
Yeah.
Because like it's easy enough to be like, this person's a good person because they do X. It's like, all right, but what if they have a need that makes them do Y? Like that's kind of always the limit of people talking about like, oh, these people. Well, hang on, let me try to rethink this. It's like it's fine to want to be better, but the reality is like much more conflicted, especially when you're used to not being a good person.
Exactly. I
Like
think
the very concept of trying is a little tough. Like improving yourself and learning stuff and facing hard truths about yourself, that's tough. That's why not everyone pulls it off.
I always go back to characters like Xena, who are more interesting because of the fact that she, if you ever watch the old school Xena and Hercules, Xena
did.
was always more interesting because she was a conflicted character. She was somebody who was not good in her earlier life, is now trying to do good, but often slips
Yes.
in terms of that. And so she's more interesting to watch. I
Yeah.
would say more interesting to write as well, because
Oh, I'm
when
sure.
you have characters that are more morally ambiguous, you can kind of take the idea of, okay, in this situation, what would Sal do? Like
Yeah.
she could do the good thing, or she can go a little hardcore.
Well, I mean, it's a good I have watched a shit ton of Xena. Like I watched
Yeah.
every season for ages. Uh I was way into fantasy, which like
Hmm.
nowadays everyone has like, oh, I have like a million Marvel movies to watch and a
Right.
billion Star Wars movies to watch, or and I can watch Lord of the Rings. But like back in the late 90s, we didn't really have that.
No,
Like
we had
we
we had
we
Xena and Highlander, right?
we had Xena, we had Highlander, we had like a handful of other less popular shows,
Hmm.
but we didn't really have like these vast, sprawling cinematic affairs. And
Right.
so a lot of people who liked fantasy in the 90s ended up watching a lot of Xena, Warrior Princess, which I did as well. And like I'm only now kind of understanding how much it seeped into my writing because like
You're subconscious a little
yeah,
bit.
like I'll just be editing something and I'll look and I'm like, wow, why do I do that a lot? And then I'll just think about it. Oh, right, because I really liked seeing that once on a Xena episode.
Exactly. And
Um,
the cutting edge special effects in Xena.
oh
Go
yeah.
back now. Oh, they're
Oh
pretty
yeah.
good.
Back in the day when like you didn't have CGI monsters, you had to have some guy in like this big rubber suit and like
Or you did get the CGI monster that was just a bunch of polygons,
yeah, oh, those were good
the
times.
low
Like
res polygons.
the early, yeah, where it's like geometric and blocky and like you're
Exactly.
just it's kind of like how in we all learn about like ancient theater
Hmm.
where they just had like the stage hands up there just moving stuff around and you're
Exactly.
like how did anyone watch this without being totally distracted by this? And then you look at these polygons and remember back in the day you were just kind of supposed to just sort of accept that this was a monster. Like even though it looked really terrible, you just kind of were like,
Exactly.
okay, that's a monster. I get it.
Exactly.
We kind of lost something with the end of that. Like everything's super high polished now. So it's like, oh, envision this dragon. Like, okay, that's a dragon, and I can see every scale on that dragon. Like you don't really get to use your imagination and be like, okay, how could this be a dragon? Even though the polygons are
Exactly.
terrible.
Exactly. I really miss like in Aliens where they,
Oh yeah.
it was just bags and puppetry and really creative camera effects to give the look of
Yeah.
the
And
mother
like
alien. So
that's kind of come back, I feel, in a way. Like at least in I'm because I'm a big horror fan as well, and I've seen a lot of resurgence for practical effects in horror, which I think there is kind of a weird appreciation for practical effects as an art form. And
right.
like I don't know if that's enough to sustain like practical effects, but I do kind of appreciate that people are at least looking towards it with some appreciation like
Some
that.
reference.
Yeah, some reverence.
Yeah. Well, and nowadays, one of the huge trends, of course, is horror. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of writers are really addressing a lot of really interesting social um, topics. Matt Ruff, Stephen Graham Jones, quite a few people using horror as a method of kind of breaking through and discussing some touchier subjects.
Yeah,
And I think that that's really cool. And I think you can do that in horror movies as well. We were talking a little bit earlier, not to digress from
right.
talking about Three Axes to Fall, but you're actually you've kind of got a thought of a potential horror novel going on in your back of your mind right now too, right?
Yeah, an interesting thing is that yeah, horror does address a lot of social issues these days because
Mhm.
it's an art form, and that's one of the things art is supposed to do is talk about social issues in an interesting way. But I also feel like horror is almost a form of therapy. Like when you can kind of like we've all had a couple of years now to just kind of stew and be
Mhm.
upset and be stuck inside with our angry thoughts and be upset about what's going on and helpless it is how helpless we are to change a lot of that.
Mhm.
Like we've all had issues with that, I think, or at least I have. I mean, I'll
Oh,
just I'll
100%.
speak for myself here. Like I fucking during the lockdown, I spent a lot of time being like, oh my God, I'm so irritated. Like I have nothing to do but be angry and think some thoughts that have not served me well in the long run.
Mhm.
And I feel like I've seen this kind of kickstarted when I watched the movie Smile, which is horrifying, and I don't really want to talk about it because it's so fucking scary that I still have trouble thinking about it.
I have
But
not
like
seen that one yet, but
it's raw, man. Like anyone watching right now, if you're thinking of seeing Smile, like it's really good, but boy, it messed me up. But it did get me thinking about horror as sort of when you can control the nightmare
mhm.
and like you can direct it, you can kind of give it meaning. And
Right.
I think the what's really hard to handle is just meaningless horror, like horror without direction. That's still valid. Like
Right.
everything is still valid. I'm not pooping on anyone's beliefs or abilities or preferences. I like that people can do that, we have the freedom to do meaningless horror. But like when horror is pointed and there's kind of a purpose behind the suffering, it feels a little therapeutic. Like it
It
feels a little
does.
like if I go through this really hard thing, then I will come out stronger on the other side, or I will be a little braver, or I'll at least be tougher. Like
Right.
I kind of want to explore that. Like I want to sort of have an experience where I can, or at least tell an experience, a story where I can talk about meaningful pain, I guess. Like not
Right.
like pain, but like heartbreak and trauma and anguish. Cause like those are all part of the human psyche now, like a
Yeah.
lot of people have gone through a lot of shit. And I feel like a lot of shit needs to be kind of exercised, at
Mhm.
least from me. Like I feel like I've got some stuff to talk about and I want to do it in a very spooky lens.
Exactly. Well, during COVID, I read Tolkien,
Yeah.
I reread Tolkien, I reread Eddings,
Yeah.
I read Kevin Hearn, and I read you.
Yeah.
And that's what I ended up doing to keep myself kind of positive and going through the pandemic. Because, other than going and walking the dog,
Yeah.
and coming here to the bookstore and
Oh yeah.
running outside and delivering books, even there it was a little bit diminished. You miss people, and
Yeah.
you wanted a little bit more comfort, but I always have to say that within your books, you're not afraid to go violent. You're not afraid to go over the top, which I think would serve you really well with doing horror. Um, and I've always liked that repartee between your characters, and you can do that really well in a horror novel as well.
Oh yeah.
Um, so when you're writing, and especially when you wrote Three Axes to Fall, is this the fantasy novel you've always kind of wanted to write?
Yeah, like so long as we're talking about books as therapy, this book was kind of therapeutic, which is interesting to me that you call it kind of a comfort and positive read because
I
at the end of Seven Blades in Black, Sal has destroyed a town and left to sort of do more horrible stuff.
But it was so satisfying at the end too. And you go dark, but I don't need a Xanax when I'm done with reading your book.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
I mean, that's kind of what I guess that's part of what I was doing with this book, is just this idea of meaningful heartbreak and meaningful suffering. Because at the time I had been writing it, I'm pretty open about this, but like I on my Instagram and on my blog, I talk about my mental health, which, I feel pretty comfortable talking about it, just because I feel like it's still something that is difficult for a lot of people to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, it's still difficult for people to talk about, even as we're in this big push to destigmatize it, because I feel like a lot of people, just from seeing ads on Instagram and social media about what mental health recovery is supposed to look like, I feel like a lot of people get discouraged,
Mm-hmm.
just from thinking like, oh, like healing is supposed to be beautiful and you're supposed to feel like a new person after, and I don't. What's wrong with me? There's not a lot of people talking about like actually healing kind of occurs through struggle, at
Yeah.
least mentally. Like it occurs through effort and trying and a lot of hard stuff.
Yeah,
Like
100%.
and this book was kind of like that, because at the end of 10 Arrows of Iron, which was the second book, it kind of ends on an emotional gut punch, like
Right.
there is everything has been that could go wrong, did go wrong, and it was all
Exactly.
in the name of very petty revenge, and it didn't end up making anyone happy.
Right.
And then in this book, like there's more gut punches. Like it's kind of like loss and struggle and enduring that sort of struggle,
Mm-hmm.
uh and coming out the other side. Like above all with Sal, like her main defining feature is that she's tough.
Right.
Like she can take a hit, and her whole thing is that if you hit her, she's going to hit you back much worse. uh but like I kind of really wanted a character like that, who could not just be tough as in like get punched and go like, I didn't feel that, but like
Right.
sort of get hit right in the emotions, and like take an enormously traumatic mental blow like that, and still manage to get back up and be like, okay, that fucking hurt. That hurt like hell. That might always hurt like hell, but I'm still going to keep going.
Exactly.
Like I do feel there is kind of, and I've already said this, I'm very touchy feely about art. I do feel like the protagonists we write are kind of I don't think the protagonists we wish we were, not always, but I do feel like they speak to some part of ourselves. And I think some people have, and I'm one of them, like some people kind of want to see a person like this and just see what they're doing and see how they endure.
Mm-hmm.
And like, because that's kind of the question of all three books, is like, how do you be a good and happy person when you kind of completely fuck everything up all the time?
You
And
know,
I feel like a lot of people probably could relate to that.
I think so. And I think that that's one of the reasons why Sal is such a likable character throughout
Yeah.
the entire series. I mean, we put up with Sal's antics and bullshit for 2,100 pages or so. And
Big,
every page is a delight, because you're going through and you're growing with her. You're seeing her from her perspective and her life, and she's an incredibly interesting character to live with. Now, you and I, though, happen to both be big gamers as well,
oh yeah.
and JRPGs are my bread and butter,
Yeah.
and RPGs in general, but
Oh yeah.
especially JRPGs. And we were talking about Elden Ring a little bit,
Yeah.
as well. So in terms of that, I mean, there is a certain level of viscerality to your books,
Right.
that I think kind of garners from maybe that um, influence that you and I both have grown up with, I think.
I feel like when I first started writing, there were a lot. I'm let me start over. When I first started writing, the question everyone was asking was like, who are the influences, like, and they were always talking about other authors, like, oh, was this influenced by Tolkien? Was this influenced by Eddings? And like, fantasy in general has always kind of given a massive shit about who's influencing who and
Yeah,
like what's paying homage to what. Uh, and I used to really resent that because it used to feel like, well, why are we trying to compare? Why are we trying to? It kind of felt like trying to give another author credit for a book they didn't write.
right,
And it's
exactly.
like that bothered me. But I've kind of come to lean into it to an absurd degree to where it's like, what if it's not just uh what if it's not just authors that influence people now? Like, what anime influences people? What manga influences people? What games influence people? And
Exactly.
I always find it very funny because I feel like I can spot the gamers when the people who play video games who also write books when I read them,
Hmm.
because of that viscerality. Like, we kind of gamers interpret a lot of information through very small moments
Hmm.
that are sort of mapped out by spectacle, right?
Right.
Like it's not just like to when you're looking at someone playing a game, it's like they tap a button and then the character counters an attack. But what
Hmm.
you're seeing is this character, like, I need to keep control of this situation by doing this, and by doing this animation will happen. So like video games always need to be really visceral and aggressive so that you can feel when things are going right.
Right.
And I do kind of put that in my books. Like, I kind of love describing impact, I'm very anti like he parried, she thrust, he struck. Like, I'm very much like their blades met and a shock echoed down their bones.
Exactly.
Well,
Eh, But that sort of works as a gamer too, because that's such a 3D experience now. You're holding that controller and it just feels right. You know when things you've got everything under control when you're playing something. And like
right.
Elden Ring, which is so hard, right? It's such a hard game.
Oh my
But
God,
at the
yes.
same time, it is so satisfying when you conquer through that challenge.
It's
Oh,
I totally get what you're saying, and I completely lost my shit over Elden Ring
yeah.
because it was, as you know, it was made by From Software. From Software made tons of uh someone has just texted me to let me know they're alive, so that's very
Okay,
that's
cool.
very gratifying. Um but From Software always makes these games that you kind of have to that have a large buy-in, shall we say. Like, you got to put up with a lot of frustration
Right.
to feel like you know what you're doing. And I found the same thing happened with the storytelling there.
Mhm.
And I got so excited for Elden Ring just because this was the first time that storytelling really clicked with me. And I like, every time I would bounce off a Dark Souls story, I bounced off Steven Erickson's work for the same reason. I'm like, I want to know what's going on. Like, don't just throw me in and expect me to figure it out. But this time I did. Like, this time I was in Elden Ring and I was just like, this owns. Like, I have no idea what's happening. I really want to find out. I'm just going to poke around. And like, that too was therapeutic. Like, obviously I've been doing a lot of therapy lately, so everything's kind of therapeutic, but there was something very obviously, it's very good to feel capable, like you can put that stuff together. but like it also kind of made the story, in my opinion, feel a little more human, because you weren't getting this vast sprawling story, or you were, but you were getting it in pieces and in fragments told from other people's perspectives. So you were just I described the game as a murder mystery where you're the detective and the victim is the entire world.
Yeah.
And I ended up really feeling great about the knowledge that I had gained in that game, and just the way I sort of poked through stuff to figure things out. And I decided I wanted more of that. So like that's kind of seeped its way into my writing a little bit, where like I'm less eager to explain everything. And like one of my favorite things, this used to drive me nuts, but now I can see why authors do it. I love writing stuff like, and I'm sure you saw this in like 3 Axes. We're like, oh yeah, we met a gigantic fucking snake coiled around a mountaintop, but that's not the most important thing. So let's move on. And like, I love the idea of someone going like, wait, what the fuck? What's up with that snake?
Exactly.
But I also like the idea of them like being bothered by it and thinking like, all right, what's up with the snake? What would the snake do? Like,
I think when I first encountered one of the dragon shrines that are there in Elden Ring,
oh
I'm
yeah,
like, why is there a dead dragon right here?
yeah, like everything is, it's so deliberate, and like that's like, it's not a mistake that this enemy is here. He's not just wandering around. He's doing something.
Right.
Like, by watching him, you figure out what he's doing.
Exactly. So, and you do these little nods within 3 Axes to Fall, which is really cool. But the thing is that we've got now, because you and I both grew up in the 90s, and I felt like fantasy, we had Xena for television. Yeah. We didn't have a lot of movies, not until Lord of the Rings sort of began to popularize, and these superhero films had started to kind of come alive. We didn't have a lot of that. So for us, a lot of fantasy, when we couldn't get it in media through television or movies, it was through video games.
Oh yeah.
And so and your action as well, like you said, really developed a more three-dimensional outtake, and I thought a lot clearer. Because within fantasy, when you get into fighting scenes or you get into action, I think that's one of the hardest things to write, and to write clearly.
I agree, but I think it gets really exciting when you kind of open up this idea of I have one of my very good friends, Wesley Chu, once told me that every fight scene should be like a conversation with fists. And I like that idea, because I've been a big fan of this idea that the fighting, like the character development and the motives, they don't change when they're still fighting, like they're still the same characters and they're still doing things for a reason. I grew up reading Drizzt books by R.A. Salvatore.
Yes.
And so I'm a big student. For a long time, I was very excited by his combat writing, because I believe he used to be a boxer, and he's so technical in his I don't want to call it little, in his descriptions of fighting and feinting. And I love it to death, and I still enjoy it every time I reread it, but it's not what I want to do anymore. Like all my fight scenes, I feel like I want to describe a fight scene more in impact and in like the emotional, maybe not even emotional, just like the physical, like the sensation of swords clanging together, or of taking a hit, or of just like the weariness of having to keep fighting. Like I'm a little maudlin about it. Like I can definitely see why, like it's very obvious to me why R.A. Salvatore has as many fans as he does, because like the stuff I'm talking about sounds a little exhausting to read it all the time, but it is the stuff I like doing. Like I really like combat scenes that you sort of measure in feelings rather than in maneuvers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's always, I mean, they always have me at the edge of my seat. Now, with your books and with you do write epic fantasy. And
Yeah.
so you write 700-page books. And
Yeah.
and to me, it feels like um they're not 700 pages of wasted word, which is something that can be hard to do within fantasy. Is it because you like big books and you cannot lie? I mean, is that part of
Yeah. Obviously. Well, like I mean, one of the obvious things there is that my mom is Diana Gabaldon, and I grew up watching her churn out like dictionary-sized books. And like I don't know, for some reason that just all looked very normal to me. Like I had no concept of what a book's size should be. So just the idea, I just kept thinking like, well, a book takes as long as it takes to tell the story. And obviously, like I had smaller books. It's not that I believed books should only be like, it's not that like I was unaware that there were smaller books.
yeah.
It's just like I liked the idea that books could be huge and have a lot of value. And I guess I've never really grown out of that. Like
Yeah.
I think like Hemingway said of Faulkner, big words don't make big feelings. And I would agree with that. But if you like big words and big feelings, you get a 700-page book.
Exactly.
And for me, I'm like, people are like, "Oh, you wrote a big book." I'm like, I gave you a lot of story. What are you complaining about? Like, what are you mad that I gave you more story?
Do you find that it's challenging to remember what you wrote in book one with what you have in book three, though? Or no?
Not really. And I think that's just the way I think about things. Like I think about emotional beats, but like also I do limit my scope. Like I feel like it's almost a storytelling mistake to talk about the same conflict, situation, threats, whatever you want to talk about. Like I'm a big like in book one, in book two, we don't discuss or see some protagonists or antagonists that we saw in book one. I think it gets kind of tiring to sort of keep relentless track and like keep everyone up to date for what everyone is doing all the time. Like George R. R. Martin did a great job of it, where he just had a chapter for everyone who needed to say something. And his books are freaking huge too.
Yeah.
Uh, but like I like the idea of not talking about like if a character doesn't do anything that book, then there's not really too much of a need to talk about them outside of just establishing that they exist. So I don't really find that I end up with not knowing what happened so much as like I can kind of decide what's important and what isn't. And that's become both easier for me and just something I like in the book. Like I like that we can leave readers wondering with what's happening with these other guys that aren't being mentioned.
I feel like within your books, like even though they're a trilogy, they're kind
Yeah.
of accessible on their own as well.
Yeah.
I could read book three without having read book two and one, and not that I would still know that I'm missing something,
Sure.
but it would be if I were alien and from another planet and didn't know how fantasy trilogy should work,
Yeah.
I would be able to pick up book three and follow along. And I think that's uh, paramount to, nod to your storytelling, because you tell us what's important, but you don't over explain. We don't have 100 pages of book two,
Yeah.
book three.
Yeah. I'm not sure who popularized it. I want to say Mark Lawrence, but I might be misremembering. But some some author just started doing recap chapters at the start of their books. And I thought that was both very clever and also kind of felt a little TV-ish, just sort of like previously on.
I remember that.
Yeah, and like
1990s, X-Men.
X-Men, yeah,
Yeah,
previously on
on
X-Men. And then
X-Men.
it showed you a bunch of fragments of, and you're like, all right, maybe
Exactly.
that makes sense. Maybe I'm going to try my best to make that make sense.
How many times by the time season 4 rolled around, they showed Morph getting killed? That
Oh God, Morph. Like the first time it happened, I was like, no. And then he came back and I'm like, and then he kept disappearing. I don't know. People talk about like, oh, kids' TV in the 90s, it was so mindless. No, it wasn't. Like
no,
X-Men was fucking complex. You needed a goddamn dictionary to keep up.
it was like basically it was a soap opera.
Oh yeah. No, it was
100% a soap
it
opera.
was a soap opera with superpowers. And like
Exactly.
honestly, they were onto stuff. Like they should have kept going with that. Like they should have leaned hard into it. And we almost got that with like superhero movies for like
Mhm.
they started getting a little deep, but then it's like, no, we don't have time for that much depth.
Zack Snyder, the Snyder cut I just watched of Justice League,
Oh my God.
and because I finally got HBO Max because they had a sale for like $1.99 for 3 months.
Yeah.
I'd be an idiot to pass this up, and I've been wanting to watch it, so I did. And I've got to say, it was really good, but it is a little soap opera-ish.
Yeah, and like that's kind of the caveat to what I'm talking about because obviously I'm very pro feelings. I want tons of feelings in all of my books, but the caveat there is that, and you can see this in Marvel movies, people will take a lot more jokes than they will take drama. Like everyone loves drama, and we kind of need it in our literary diets, so to speak.
Yeah,
But we also need levity,
we do.
and people will accept way more quips and jokes. Like they'll sit through a whole movie of quips and jokes, and like at the end they might come out being like, well, that I wish that had been deeper, but that's at least fun. But people can only take a couple of tragic things, so like you do have to. I really hate thinking of it this way because I hate the idea of balancing anything because it's just such a cliched word. It's like, oh, you got to make sure it's all balanced. Well, yes, okay, that's specific, but like you do. That's why I like including a lot of jokes. Like it makes because tell a lot of jokes in my books because I want to also tell a lot of heartbreak.
Well, and then reading through your Twitter, which is always super entertaining, Sam. I get your sense of humor.
Yeah.
I enjoy it. You're somebody who likes to make people laugh. You're somebody who likes to bring some joy to other people's lives as well, I think.
Yeah. I enjoy it. Like obviously I'm not gonna say no. I fucking despise making people laugh. It is interesting though because there's a big difference between wanting to make people laugh and needing to make people laugh. And sorry, I'm going back to the to the well here, but like I have been doing a lot of therapy, and I've come to realize that when you're needing people to make people laugh, it's coming from a weirdly insecure place.
Mhm.
And so it doesn't hit well. And I think that actually comes through in a lot of writing in media today, is that there is kind of a need to make people laugh. Like and I think it's almost in response to so much heartbreak in the real world, is just people saying like, oh, like there's so much misery, we don't need more misery. Like I need to make people laugh with this, I need to take their minds off it, which I think any one of us could see ourselves trying that. Like you want to feel like you can impact it, but when you need to make people laugh, it's usually because there's something more serious that you really need to talk about.
Exactly.
And I've kind of leaned into that with writing.
Well, and fantasy gets a bad rap. I think fantasy as a genre, people say, well, it's just escapist reading
Yeah,
a lot, right? From the haters. Haters gonna hate.
the haters. Are you out there, haters? We're not tolerating this.
Exactly.
Fantasy will not be bullied by you.
But but you do hear that sometimes you get the, from people who don't understand fantasy. And I think that it's a great way to explore human condition and to
Yeah.
explore, I think it's really a cool opportunity to really dig in deep in terms of
I
character, in terms of subject matter,
sure.
what have you.
I agree. Like obviously I think highly of my own genre. Uh but I also believe that there is no such thing as real escapism. Like
Right.
you can take your mind off stuff and that's fine. And there's some media out there that really does try to take your mind off stuff. But I also think that's kind of impossible because I think when we feel like we've truly escaped something, like be that whatever we're running from mentally or emotionally, when we feel like we've escaped, I feel like we feel the thing is no longer threatening to us.
Mhm.
And when we're just watching media that's just like, oh, happy quip and oh, delight, then we're kind of denying ourselves that essential heartbreak.
Mhm.
And it feels wrong almost.
Yeah.
And so like, and I think that's what makes escapism can become kind of like a drug. Like I just need to be distracted. But if your art is just distracting you and not helping you work through stuff, then you're not really escaping. And
Right.
like I can see why people say that about fantasy because like let's be totally honest right now, like nerds nerd media dominates everything. Like
Right.
there's like let's just not even talking about superhero movies. There's just way more fantasy, way more budget in fantasy and all this exciting stuff. I'm not saying there's not good television that isn't nerd related, obviously, but like nerds are eaten well for a while.
Right.
And I feel like we have kind of seen people realize the true strength of this, and that is not like what do people like, what is like, we don't do studies of settings anymore. We do studies of characters in settings.
Right.
And if you want like the big dog of all of this, it's Walking Dead. Like the point of Walking Dead, I remember it came out and it went on for like 3 seasons, and people suddenly started talking about like, well, there's no more zombies. Why isn't this a zombie show anymore? And it's always struck me that the point of Walking Dead and the popularity was not the zombies. It's what do people act like when they are put in this situation, which
Exactly.
I don't know if you watched The Boys.
Yeah.
Uh, I freaking love The Boys.
Oh yeah. The
And The
boys
Boys
is
is very much that. Like, what do people do when they are in when they have superpowers? What do people do when they're in this setting? And that's the real joy of fantasy, in my opinion, is and like you have stuff like Star Trek where it's like, what do people do when all their needs are met? And there is this utopian idea.
right.
And like in my books, it's like, what do people do when they've made a really fucking bad decision? And
Exactly.
now it's coming to catch up with them.
That's 100%. And aside for the boys, for people who haven't seen the boys, I think that it is really a great show in terms of a study of character because, boy, we would think that um, having superpowers, we would be the best of ourselves, right? And
Yes.
really, no, they're just as insecure,
Yes.
and they've
That
got
that was that was the whole thrust of the show. That's I was a big fan of the comics, but I really loved the idea. What if what if people got superpowers instead
right.
of good people? And like I think that's kind of one of the greatest parts about fantasy right now is like, what if a person was in this situation instead of a good person? Like, because fantasy used to be very like, oh, brave knight destroys evil wizard, stops dragon, does good, is good, all that sort of shit.
Yeah.
And like, that's fine. And there's still people who really want that idealized format. And I'm sure they always will. There's always going to be a desire for stories where people are just at their best. And that's where it can start to feel like escapism a little, because
Right.
when it's just people and it's just people handling things, then you kind of get to enjoy believing that you could handle it too.
Yeah.
Like, in Game of Thrones, it kind of, everyone's talking about the show, mind you. I'm not talking about the books. In the show, when Game of Thrones started going a little off the rails and people started complaining a little more, I kept thinking, like, it's like, well, yeah, but you kind of asked it to be that way. Like, you kept saying, I want these characters to become more powerful and level up and get stronger and start leading stuff. It's like, okay, but now they're not quite the same people that you fell in love with. And so it's harder to see yourself in them.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's something you got to consider, because nerds, and I'm sorry, nerds, I count myself amongst you, but there's a big urge to sort of see things get leveled up, and like, because that feels like working through something. Like, obviously,
Exactly.
like, that's why RPGs are very satisfying emotionally, because it's like,
Yeah, 100%.
I have a problem, I will gain a level and gain the staff of flame, and now I don't have a problem anymore. We can do that. You can actually do that with books. Like, I have a problem, I read a book, I don't have that problem anymore. It's just the book kind of has to be about dealing with shit rather than growing out of it.
Exactly.
In my
Do you know how annoying it would be if you're reading though and you saw like stat increases?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Like, just
Oh, there we
this.
go.
Well, you know what? I'm actually going to give a shout out. There is such a. I'm sorry, my dog is here. He really wanted to be a part of this.
Oh, absolutely. You gotta
Hi,
share.
Bosley.
Hey, Bosley, how you
But
doing,
like,
buddy?
I want to give a shout out. There is a genre called lit RPG where it is just, as far as I know, I haven't read widely about it, but it is like, Bosley, come on. It is like an RPG written in novel format, and a lot of people seem to really like it. And I am, above all else, I'm interested when people like stuff. I'm not critical.
So,
So there are probably someone like furiously typing a comment right now, like, how dare you? I love seeing stats go up. We wish you peace, whoever you are.
Robin Stoll had an interesting question for you here
Okay.
online, and she wanted to know what your early gaming influences were that have influenced
Ooh.
your writing. And then I'm going to add a question to that. And what would be 3 games that you would recommend people play to get a good um, either that have influenced you as a writer, or you think are just maybe an example of good writing
Ooh,
or
okay.
storytelling?
I think I can cover all of this. One of my earliest gaming influences, the earliest I can remember, was Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, because it was the first time my brain kind of caught up to that point where I could be like, oh, games have a story. Like, before that, I'm not like, games have always had stories, but like in the NES days, like, the story was like, you are man is moving right. Some people don't want man to go right. And there's like, okay, yeah, that's a conflict at least. But then when I played Link to the Past, my first Zelda game, like, I could actually like follow along and be like, oh, I need to go here because of this. But the first time but even then it was still primitive, because I was very young and I was very impatient. So I would skip a lot of the dialogue and then be very upset that I didn't understand what was going on. But then I remember in the late 90s, I did so many chores and so many odd jobs to save up for a PlayStation. And then with that PlayStation, I bought Final Fantasy VII. And that was the first time I truly just really connected with a story. Like, to the point where like I wasn't just following along, I was in it. I had opinions, I had feelings. Like, and everyone is gonna tell you, like, everyone has a like, oh yeah, I played that game and I got really sad when Aris died. Yes, me too. But like I was sad throughout the whole thing. Like I was sad at all the pain these guys had to go through. And I was like, I was like, I've never had this thing where like that's when I really became in love with games, because I'm like, I've never had this feeling like this. These are stuff like, this is going to get a little complex, but like there weren't a lot of books aimed towards young boys that dealt a lot with feelings. We had a lot of books, and like I'm sure someone's going to get upset like, oh no, what about this and this and this? I'm like, all right, well, I didn't read those. But like I'm talking about in fantasy, which is where I read widely, most of the books were about like that prospect. Like I have a problem, I got a magic mask, and now I don't have that problem. They got deeper, like they did get deeper, but never like so deep as to say like it's okay for you to have feelings. Like the end goal of those books always felt like you solve the problem and now you don't feel things anymore. And like Final Fantasy VII was like one of the early games where it felt like it's okay. It's not only okay to not have things figured out, but nobody actually does. And like even saving the world doesn't figure out everything. And like, because I was going like, I was a kid, I had hormones going crazy, I had life problems, and it felt good to watch something that was like, you can still, like, you don't have to be good, you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be willing to try.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that. So like I feel like I've been trying to capture that ever since, just that idea of like, it doesn't matter how ugly it is or how bad it looks. If you're just going to try, it doesn't have to look pretty. You can just struggle through it.
Right.
Like, and it's no fucking coincidence that all my books feature at least one scene of the protagonist just like can't fucking go on, and they just collapse and they're like, I don't want to anymore. That's very true to life, and especially my life, and I think a lot of people's lives, especially now. But so I would definitely recommend as one of those games Final Fantasy VII, just because it really was an experience. Like it changed everything for me, and I think for a lot of people. I really would have to. I'm going to avoid giving another shout out to Elden Ring because we already have. I will say the new God of War games from 2018 and just recently 2020, Ragnarok, incredible. Just stunning showings of character and motivation, and how sometimes it's just what people want that makes them do bad things, and not that they're bad. It owned. It was so good, both of those games. But the one I've got to say that I think would give the biggest, I think this is tough because I'm trying to think of the game I would recommend if I wanted people to like my books. And I've already described Grave of Empires as a love letter to Final Fantasy, and that's true. But like, I feel to appreciate the Grave of Empires. Shit, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to say, I think I would recommend Elden Ring, because it's a story about Elden Ring, above all else, is a story about how if you simply refuse to give up, you can not only make things better, but also your way of making things better frequently looks like it's making things much worse. Which is all about Sal the cacophony. I was about to say Sal the protagonist, but which is also true. But yes, Sal is a protagonist who makes it worse, and that's something I love about her.
Sometimes you wonder what you're doing in Elden Ring and whether or not it's the morally right thing or not, right?
Or even if it's
And
effective.
exactly.
I
And
love,
you die so many times in Elden Ring, and it's just getting back up and getting on the horse,
yeah. And like
trying
there's
it in a different way. And
yeah, like I really enjoy that because it's just like it's very straightforward. It's like you die and you try again. There is no way forward that does not involve you doing that. Like
exactly,
you can't think your way out of this. You just kind of have to let it hit you enough times that you know how to deal with it.
exactly.
And I think that's something I wish I had more of in my life.
I sometimes I wish that I was when I was younger that we had something like Elden Ring. Maybe it was Mega Man. Mega Man was probably our version of Elden Ring.
Yeah, I mean Mega Man was difficult because like games used to have game overs where you just had to start the whole thing from the beginning. And like that was discouraging. That did not teach stick to itiveness, but Elden Ring does.
I've never finished a Mega Man game except for X.
X. I have yeah, like Mega Man games were always just games that you played and looked beautiful, and then you tried your hardest, and frequently you didn't get anywhere.
So, sometime probably within the next week or so, you're actually going to be popping by to sign books here at the store.
Yes.
So the nice thing is for the holidays, for those of you who would like a beautifully personalized copy of Three Axes to Fall, and I'm going to hold this up here.
What a
Can
gorgeous.
you can still order it from the Poison Pen, um, and still have time to get it personalized because Sam's got a lot of personal,
I've got
uh,
a lot of
exciting things going on right now. So,
yeah.
which is pretty awesome. So he'll be coming by the store here in Phoenix to or in Scottsdale to sign books. Uh,
Right.
gives you time to get your book personalized.
Yeah. Just anyone who wants a book, let the Poison Pen know. They're on that internet.
That crazy internet.
That crazy internet we all love so well.
Poisonpen.com. Of course, you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter, but we're more exciting as a store. Although Facebook, I mean, we're and YouTube
The
and
store is really good. I
we
love
are,
the
we
store.
are, and that's why I've been with the store for 20 years, Sam. 20
I
years. It's
I've been
crazy.
there for much of it.
Yeah, you
I've
have
seen
been
you. I've seen you.
a couple times.
Yeah.
We've gone like this, maybe. Oh, there you are, Sam.
There you are.
Nothing, nothing that would make you feel uncomfortable in front of a
Right.
crowd. Um, so Sam, for those of you who are interested, or for those who are interested in following you, where can they find you?
I'm on Twitter at Sam Sykes Swears, and I'm at samsykes.com. I don't know when people are listening to this, but at the time it is 2022 December. Elon Musk owns Twitter, and he's making decisions. Uh, so
That's the best way to
I'm
describe it.
so like social media is kind of in an upheaval right now for a lot of people, I think. So hopefully, when you're listening to this, everything still exists,
Exactly.
but I
We're
can be found in those places.
and in perpetuity. Now in the future, we can't tell you where you'll
Right.
be.
No, like
Exactly.
let's not plan too far ahead.
Let's not do that.
Right.
Um, Sam, in terms of new projects, we're really looking forward to seeing new projects coming out. Is there anything exciting that's going on right now, or are you just working
I
on next?
am I am working on something new. Stories are here's another thing I learned in therapy. Stories are something I really want to do, and like as long as people still keep reading, I'm just gonna keep writing. And I think I've my next project is going to be a horror comedy, something I feel like I've wanted to write for a while. Maybe a little breather from Grave of Empires. I do want to write more Grave of Empires. So,
We got a good recommendation here. Martha suggested maybe Sal's prequel written from another person's perspective.
ooh, that could be fun because everyone feels a lot of ways about Sal.
We also had a couple neat comments here in the field, Sam, before we go.
Sure.
Martha says that her grandson's been tutoring her about fantasy and gaming. Between Sam and his writer mom and my grandson, my life has been taking a very interesting turn, and it's
Well,
great. She really appreciates it.
I'm happy. I'm happy to hear that. Like
Yeah.
everyone's like I talk trash about fantasy a lot because I love it so much, but I do love it, and I think it is a really cool thing for people to have in their lives,
Mhm.
just as an interest.
I'm gonna do a shout out to the grandmother who plays uh and streams live
Skyrim?
Skyrim. If you
Oh,
ever want a really pleasant like hour, just watch her playing Skyrim. It's the
I'm
best therapy you'll ever need.
I'm almost reluctant to ask, is she still with us?
I don't know. I hope
I'd be
so.
afraid to look. Like I thought I read something about that maybe not being the case. I don't want to speak like I don't want any I specifically don't want to bring up anything super sensitive. So
Exactly.
I hope I didn't just poop all over everyone's good time
I
right.
know exactly. I don't
Someone
know.
watching
I
this and
watched
be
her
like,
back in
wait, is
2020.
she?
So we'll see. But it was very pleasant to watch her. So
Yeah,
anyway, on that note, Sam, thank you for everything. You've been with us since your very first book, and it's not going to be the last. So,
no.
thank you very much for everything that you do for us and for your audience. And again, everybody, even if you don't buy from the Poison Pen, please pick up a copy of Three Axes to Fall. Great book and just so much fun wherever you get your books. That's the best place to get it. And we from the Poison Pen just want to wish everybody, including Sam, a happy holidays.
Happy
And
holidays to everyone.
thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next time.
See you later, guys. Thank you for
Later.
coming.
Thanks.
Woo.
Hold on just
Okay.
let me end live video and always a little choppy there.